Good afternoon, everyone. I think we're probably just about ready to go. For those of you that have not met me before, I'm Claire Dickinson. I'm an independent consultant, and actually I chaired the steering group for this environmental good practice site guide. Right, let's see if I can get these slides to move on nicely. So certainly appreciate you all joining us today. We have actually got a large number of people registered. Not sure you're all going to be watching it live, but we are recording it for those that might not be able to actually make it right here and now. Before we begin, I've got a few housekeeping points to take you through. So let's get onto those. How is this going to work? Well, as you know, I've just mentioned it's being recorded. At the moment, all of the attendees are in listen only mode. If you are wanting to say something or you need something from the host, you can raise your hand, which for those of you if you're not familiar with Zoom, should be at the bottom of your screen. There is going to be plenty of opportunity for asking questions. We are going to deal with questions after the presentations. But if you have something that occurs to you while you're listening to a presentation that you do want to ask somebody, please just pop it in this Q&A box and we will pick them at the end. If it's a general question, you don't need to put the name of the speaker, but if there's somebody you particularly want to address a question, it'd be helpful if you put that in there. For those of you that are here and perhaps don't immediately think of your own questions, if there are questions that you've seen that have been raised by others that you think you'd like to see answer, you can use the thumbs up to indicate that you like those particular questions, which obviously helps us if we're running out of time to get to those that are of most interest to those here. There's also a chat box where you can share resources, or if there's points that you want to join in a conversation that you can contribute. And actually sometimes when we have the sort of numbers of people that we're expecting today, using the chat and the Q&A questions is a really good way of making this interactive so we all get as much out of it as possible. We are keen to hear about what you think about what we're doing today. There will be a short poll at the end of the webinar. And also, if you'd like to receive a CPD for this event, it is a bit of a deal with yourselves that we'd like you to actually complete the poll to be able to have your CPD certificate. As with all these events, we'd be very happy for you to share your views with us. For this one, it was at CIRIA updates, and we're using the hashtags biodiversity, hashtag archaeology, hashtag nuisance. Avoiding nuisance, which of course is the good practice we're looking for, was just a little bit long to fit in here. So for those of you that perhaps do not know that much about CIRIA, they have been around for quite a lot of years now. They're a member-based organisation. They've recently celebrated their 60th anniversary. And I think in the construction industry in the UK, they are generally very well known. And one of their core strengths really is in the fact that they collaborate very strongly with industry to bring about guidance on environment matters, buildability, other construction aspects that really help the industry to get better at what it does. CIRIA itself strives for continuous improvement by delivering independent and authoritative guidance. And I think one of the strengths of their guidance is the way they are set up with funders and project steering groups to help drive that that process. Sitting alongside their guidance is that they also deliver high quality training and webinars. And I think, you know, overall, they organise something in the order of 50 events a year, and have an absolutely amazing track record with some of the first guidance books that they've produced on things like asbestos, UXO for the industry, and of course, very well-known manuals such as SUDS, the ROC manual, and of course, the International Levy Handbook. So CIRIA's vision is obviously to continue to grow and contribute to making and helping the construction industry be better at what they do. Oops, straight past that, shouldn't have done that. So as I said, CIRIA is a member-based organisation. Here's just a snapshot of the members that are currently involved with CIRIA. They are always looking for new members to join them. So if you aren't a CIRIA member and you'd like to get involved, please do get in touch with them. So what are we here to talk about today? We're actually here to talk about this little book called Environmental Good Practice on Site Guide. And you'll notice there that it says 5th edition. This book has been so popular that we are now on the 5th version of this. It was actually originally, the first version of this was produced in 1999. That's a quarter of a century ago. And it has continued to develop and grow and change as our understanding and knowledge of what we need to do to protect, manage, and even enhance the environment when we're undertaking construction projects. So every construction project has environmental requirements, and it is particularly important that not only do we think about this when we're planning and getting planning permission for a project, but actually what happens on site? How is those works implemented? Because it's not just about the permanent condition that may affect the environment, but it's also about the way those works are carried out. It's incredibly important that we look at how we are managing works on site during construction to minimize the impact on the environment, and also to help the country achieve its commitments in terms of things like net zero, net waste, and meet the UN sustainability goals, which I cannot believe, you know, we're already in 2024. That means there's only 6 years until the 2030 deadline for achieving the UN's 17 sustainability goals. So this particular guide has updated the previous version and covers all the normal topics that you'd expect, like ecology, archaeology, noise, vibration, light, dust, resources, traffic, travel, vehicle use. And what we're doing today is trying to give you just a little bit of a snapshot of what this guidance is covering. None of this would be possible without the funders. So big thank you to AECOM, BAM, Kier, Marshals, National Highways, Polypipe, Thames Water, Wessex Water and Zero Waste Scotland for supporting this project. And a big thanks to the steering group, because actually it's really valuable in CIRIA's process to have the input that we get from our steering group. And this really does help to steer the project and produce authoritative, relevant and independent guidance. So, to no ado, here is the programme. We're expecting to close by 3:30 today. So we've got our first talk at 2:10, so I'm not going to continue much more because it is now 2:10 and I don't want to take up any more time. So we'll move swiftly on to welcome our speakers. I'm delighted to say that Joanne Kwan, who led this project from CIRIA's side, is here to talk to us. Cecilia McLeod, who was the research contractor for this project. And what better than to finish off with Steve Jackson, who will be giving us a view of what it's actually like to implement environmental good practice on site. So I would like to invite Joanne to come up and join us to talk about why we needed to update this guide. Joanne, are you there?
Yes, I am. Thank you very much, Claire.
Okay.
You can hear me, yeah? Everything okay, yeah?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, okay. I'm here just to spend 10 minutes to talk about the last version, which is edition 4 of the Environmental Good Practice on Site Guide, and perhaps why we need to update it. Just to remind you, CIRIA have numbers for our report, and the last edition of the site guide is C741, just in case you're confused. And it was also published in 2016. So I move the slide now. Right. So for those of you who's familiar with the C741, this is what it looks like. And this was published in 2016, as I just said. And maybe we can just remind ourselves about what happened on that year. And obviously that might have some, influence on why we decided to update the guide. Well, internationally, 2016 was an interesting year. Donald Trump becomes the US president. And also UK voted to leave European Union. So the first two things which happened, to some people, it could be a very bad thing. But surprisingly, construction industry in UK was doing quite well. And the construction output actually grew by nearly 4% in 2016. So what happened after 2016 to 2024, which is this year, is Donald Trump is no longer the US president. As we know, he still quite have his own opinion on things like climate change. And obviously it has affected our industry a bit as well. Britain has now formally left the European Union. And you probably noticed for the past 8 years, we've been sort of having so much fun and problems that related to this departure. That also affect environmental legislation and subsequently the whole construction process in the UK. We also, unfortunately, about 3 years ago, have the COVID, which affect a lot of people, not just health, but our, nations, our economy, national economies, local economy, and construction projects being quite hands-on also affect the way that obviously a lot of project has to stop because of the pandemic, but also the way that we now do things on site are changed as a result of that. Economic-wise, UK hasn't been the greatest for a long time, we all know. Yes, our inflation rate is slightly better now, but obviously the cost of living has gone up quite substantially in the past few years. And also, this is quite interesting as well. When I did this preparation for this proposal, I also found the number of people working in the construction sector has gone up quite a bit. So this is quite interesting, although our industry is not doing that well. So how does these sort of things affect the environmental side of the built environment? We have two quite substantial government plan and legislation in place since 2016. And this includes the 25 years environmental plan, which was published in 2018, and the Environmental Protection Act in 2021. So basically the plan is saying that UK needs to do better on various environmental factors. It's almost like setting the scene that you know, we need to do something. Our whole country needs to do better. And the Environmental Protection Act 2021 is obviously much more precise about what we have to do. For example, establish the Office for Environmental Protection, which becomes a sort of watchdog of how we do things on site, and also set a number of what they call environmental targets, from water to air, and even the use of plastic. And the last point is actually quite interesting, because we use a lot of plastic things on site, and something perhaps you're not so aware of before, but is all sort of being regulated. And I think us as a part of the industry needs to perhaps improve the way that we handle and manage things on site. So in the next few minutes, I'm just going to walk you through the different aspects of environmental issues that could affect your site practice since 2016. The first one I want to talk about is ecology. As you know, ecology and biodiversity is getting on top of a lot of people's agenda more in the recent years. Biodiversity net gain has started in February or April, depending on what type of site project you are this year. And that's actually affect a lot of, especially the design stage of projects. And people are desperately now trying to look at how they can need to create this 10% net gain for the projects, because it's planned a part of you know, what the government requires and what local authority require now. So while, you know, this is still quite mystified as subject, at the same time, prosecutions and fine penalties related to non-compliances is getting heavier. This was the box below is a case studies that is highlighted in the edition 5 of the report, and it's quite horrifying that, you know, almost £650,000 of fines being imposed to a site because of the damage in the ecology on the bat habitat. So these things are quite serious. That's what I'm trying to say. We're you know, the industry are being pushed to do better, and because the penalties getting heavier. So if you don't do it right, it will definitely you know, cost everybody a lot more money, and it just will affect the sort of bottom line of a lot of projects. Then waste, you know, I'm sure there's a lot of people in the audience that are specialists in waste or resource management. The government's always been has been pushing more recently about we need to manage, there's still too much construction materials going to landfill, although their landfill tax has gone up quite substantially, but it's still, waste crime is still a lot of problem. And also there have been some sort of targets, like, you know, by 2030, which is only 6 years from today, that we're supposed to manage surplus soil sustainably. Is affecting the whole sort of approach that we manage materials on site. As I said, you know, the government is really trying to climb down on construction waste as a whole, because it costs a lot of money. And also the importance of circular economy becomes much more important in a lot of projects. But obviously there's still, you know, a lot of people still have problems of how to actually implement these principles on site. Then energy, I want to touch on quickly as well. As we all know, the price of energy prices has gone up substantially in the past few years. Some people say blaming the war in Russia or other international conflict, but ultimately we only have so much. You know, we still depend a lot on fossil fuel at the moment, and you know, petrol prices in 2016 was on average just over £1 per litre. Now it's almost 50% more, £1.50 per litre in 2024. So, you know, on average, you know, a lot of equipment and activities on site needs energy. So this is quite substantial, you know, in the cost. And also climate change is getting more severe, and the government is trying to achieve sort of 100% net zero for carbon by 2050. And the whole thing about being more energy efficient is getting more important. Land contamination also changed quite a lot since 2016. As I say, landfill tax has gone up substantially. There are changes on legislation on waste extraction, and also there have been a lot of guidance published since 2016 on different aspects of land contamination, and some of these are obviously going to affect site activities. Nuisance, and you might have thought, oh, what's the difference between, you know, managing dust emission and odor in 2016? I think the difference is because the effect of climate change, we're seeing more extreme weather events like storms and things like that, and those will affect obviously the spread of dust emission, odor, and also spread of other pollutants. Water, that's also related to climate change in some respect. There's a lot of more flooding happening probably, you know, once of quite a few times a year in this country. So that's obviously affecting a lot of site work. So because the site got flooded more often, how to deal with it. And obviously at the same time, we have had water stresses got very because of climate change. Summers are getting hotter. So they are inserting significant water stresses on the use of water on site. And also, you know, just before I finish, I just want to go back to the sort of the UK climate and what we are now. What's the difference between 2024 and maybe 2016? Because of these changes in climate, like hotter summers, it's not just affecting obviously the environmental side of things, actually also affecting site workers and health and safety, and also a lot of things which is happening on site, like where you put materials that is vulnerable to storms and things like that. So yes, you could say that you know, we always have to be very good in housekeeping procedures on site, but these things are getting much more important, and if you don't do it right because of the storms, extreme weather, it actually would cause more damages on site activities. So as you can see, there have been quite a lot of things has changed, from legislations to financial stuff, to you know, environmental issues related particularly to climate change. So that's the reason why we decided that we need to update edition 4 and now I think Cecilia, we're going to tell you what are the new things which is on the new guide with a new number, by the way. I think it's C811, I suppose, and perhaps hopefully that will address these recent issues. Okay?
Thank you, Joanne. Much appreciated. So if you've got any questions, just type them in the box. Also a reminder, if you want to just give your thumbs up to any good questions. And now I'm going to swiftly hand over to Cecilia so she can get on and tell you a little bit more about the meat on the bones of what's in our new guide. Cecilia, all yours. You have 20 minutes. Cecilia, are you there? We seem to have lost Cecilia. Cecilia?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, that's a relief. I thought I was going to have to deliver your book too.
The bar at the bottom disappeared, and I'm sitting here shouting at you.
Well, I'm glad we couldn't hear you shouting anyway, Cecilia, but we are very pleased you're here. Please do talk to us for 20 minutes on what's in this guide. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Cecilia McLeod, and today I'm going to talk about what's new in the guidance document, Environmental Good Practice on Site, the 5th edition, as Joanne said, and C811. So I'm working since August of last year, I've been working for Advanced Bacterial Sciences, who are developing a number of different solutions, products primarily for people to use to deal with treating environmental issues. And we're looking at replace, remediate, and regenerate using natural solutions. So the guidance, it's changed. How has it changed? Well, one of the things, and I hope it's obvious to those of you who have the 4th edition, is that we've actually changed the size a little bit. We tried really hard. We made edits, we made revisions, we grew this document into something huge, then we threw pages away, and then we put it all back together, and we tried to keep it something that would not be just overwhelming and too big. So it consists of 4 chapters and a couple of appendices, and we have it laid out so that we're looking at the environmental benefits and obligations, general project management, planning, setting up, and managing the site, environmental issues. And like all CIRIA guidance, we're not trying to tell you that this is the way you must do things, but we're suggesting approaches and pointing you to other documents that you might use that might assist you. And so you'll find some areas in the book where we've got case studies, checklists, further information, point you out to key guidance, and some of what we think are really important and that you should take note. So when we're looking at the environmental benefits and obligations, it's important to note that ESG, or environmental sustainability and governance, for a long time, when we've talked about ESG, we've referred to ISO 14001 and how you have to have an environmental management system, or we've referred to sustainability, but we haven't really pulled it all together in terms of environmental sustainability and governance. We all must buy in to ESG in order for us to be able to achieve the goals. I've put some links in here for you, so occasionally you'll see a link. And Joanne has mentioned the Green Future, the government guidance, the 25-year plan. The Environmental Protection Act of 2021, which sets forth the desire for a 10% biodiversity net gain. And we have some business-led targets to be able to achieve those environmental standards on site, corporate controls, planning, environmental management plans. All of these we really need to make sure we have in place. We need to make sure that we are looking after our staff, and we want to try to achieve the government's emissions cuts to net zero by 2050. And that's a lot for us to try to do in such a short period of time. We don't have many years left to do this. Additionally, we're trying to achieve sustainable construction. And again, I remember when they first started doing work on the Greenwich Peninsula, all way back when, and they were talking about sustainable construction then. And what we're trying to do now is we need to mitigate and adapt to climate change. Where I live right now, I live on the side of a hill, about 20-minute walk from the seafront, and by 2050, my house is, the modeling shows that my street will be 1 block away from the seafront. So we need to be able to mitigate and adapt and take consideration of climate change when we're planning new developments and look at what we've got to do. Do we need to put buildings on stilts? Do we need to leave a buffer zone? for sea level rise? Do we need to put a bigger buffer zone around rivers? These are things we need to think about as we move forward. Eliminating waste and maximizing resource efficiency. As you know, we're just a small island, and we can't just keep digging landfills up and putting waste into landfills. So we need to take into account ways that we might be able to eliminate that waste and take advantage of, we want to have a circular economy. How can we regenerate or reuse that waste or repurpose that waste so that we're not sending it off to some sort of a landfill? We want to embrace and restore nature and promote biodiversity. We don't want to just trample. I saw some photos this past week of where, illegal dumping in the beautiful Bluebell Woods. Appalling, and it was construction waste. We don't want to be doing that, and so we need to look at ways in which we can enhance our natural environment, and optimizing the health and well-being of people, both the people who work for us and the people who are going to be living in the developments that we're building or near the developments that we're building. We want to consider this and essentially create long-term value for society and improve the quality of life. And those are some of our goals. And that's what we should get out of our obligations. So we want to increase biodiversity. I meant to put a little note in here that the CIRIA will soon be opening their biodiversity challenge for 2024. And you're all encouraged to submit a project or a case for consideration in that biodiversity challenge. But we want to improve the environment. We want people to enjoy the environment. We want to build a development where people can go out and have an environment that's still beautiful, that they can walk through and they can enjoy, and they can encourage their children to go out and learn about their environment. There's so much there for them to learn. Within the guidance, we look at project management. Now in the fourth edition, a lot of quite a big handheld section on how to do a project management plan was present. And what we've done is rather than saying you must do this in developing your project management plan, what we've done essentially is set forward some guidance. And we want to identify the environmental obligations. So what are our environmental obligations for this project that we're developing? What are the considerations? That means that if we're doing this, that means we've done some sort of preliminary work even before we've put in our planning application, to understand what the environmental obligations may be, whether it's associated with biodiversity and protection of ecology, to looking at water resources and determining will there be adequate water supply in this area for the development of this size? Will the development of this size negatively impact upon nearby water resources? So what are my environmental obligations? Is there a sewage treatment works? Will I be overwhelming the capacity of the sewage treatment works by my development? So we need to start thinking of those things early on. We don't want to develop something and then suddenly find out that we're just contributing more sewage to the nearby sea. We want to look at the environmental aspects and the impacts. So what are the risks associated with what we're doing? What are the risks associated with our site activities? Am I likely to cause issues with the neighbors due to the dust that I might contribute? So what do I have to do to manage that dust? What do I have to do to make sure that we're not having large transport vehicles coming through residential neighborhoods in order to come to my site? So I need to identify all of these different types of impacts and risks associated with my development. I need to identify my environmental responsibilities. So what am I responsible for? Do I need to have any kind of permits? Are there any kind of restrictions with respect to water use? Are there any kind of restrictions with respect to noise? Have I done a noise survey? Establish the appropriate plans to manage the site activity. So I need to make sure I've got plans in place. And then I need to have monitoring. I need to be monitoring our activities on site while we're on our site. So in the guidance then, we've set forth a number of checklists. So you'll find in each chapter and in each section a series of checklists. And this basically comes from the first chapter, where we're looking at liaising with the local community, and sets forth some of the things we might consider with respect to liaising with the community, using public meetings, making sure that local community understands what we're doing, making sure we've got mitigation measures that are protecting that community. We may need to visit some occupants of schools or nursing homes and keep them informed of the progress, because we may be disturbing them and disturbing their residents. We may want to do some leafleting, write articles for the local media. There's a lot of different things we can do to be good neighbors to the local community, so that they are viewing our development as a success and not something that's causing them issues. As I said earlier, ISO 14001 is the main international standard for environmental management and sustainability. And most companies today have EMS systems, but I've got a link again into where you can find out more information about EMS in the key box as seen on this slide. And then we also have some guidance on training needs. So I have people who are going to be working on my site. They're going to be site managers, they're going to be engineers, they're going to be carpenters, they're going to be bricklayers. I need to make sure that they've got appropriate training for working on the site. Do they understand that the site could very well have, especially on a brownfield site, areas where they may be buried asbestos? Do they know what to do in case they encounter asbestos? We need to make sure that they understand pollution prevention. And we don't want to have our wastewaters from sites that are washed down from our washdown areas running out into roads. So we need to try to prevent that. And we want to make sure that if we're storing anything on site, it's appropriately bundled so that we're not spilling and making a waste. We want to put our resource management in place, make sure we've got duty of care documents for our wastes, and that our waste is being disposed of properly. Make sure everyone's aware of the ecology and archaeology, and we'll talk about that a little later, and any kinds of emergency procedures for environmental incidents. So there's a number of things in this box that we need to consider, and we need to make sure our staff have appropriate training for. And I've given you another box with some links to organizations that can supply training for staff who might be working on site. And they are not by all means the only places to go for training, but they are some places where one can go. And it's important when we demobilize from a site that we don't leave waste on site. This image is an image of a site that's a part of a site that hasn't been developed yet. It's adjacent to a new residential development, and in clearing that area, that particular phase of work for the new residential development, they moved all of the waste to a part of the site where they weren't going to be developing for some time. And that waste was just left. It wasn't sorted properly. I've walked through it, and it has asbestos tiles and a variety of different types of waste piled on that site. And it appears as though that the contractor considered that by putting a big hoarding up around it, that was protection. That's not going to be protection from dust, and that's not going to protect anything from downward migration, and having unbagged asbestos sitting around loose on a site is never a good idea. We need to remove all mitigation measures. This is an image showing a newt trap Again, the newt traps oftentimes are made of plastics. If they're not removed after the development is complete, then what you have is plastics that degrade, break down, and get into the environment. And the whole is a trip hazard for people using the site. We need to look at all of the environmental issues. So, and that includes biodiversity, as I said. So we have to look at the effects on ecology from the construction. These can be direct and indirect. The Environmental Protection Act, as I said, wants us to look at biodiversity net gain. We need to manage protected species. There are now criminal prosecutions being made where people have been ignoring protected species. And we need to look at non-native invasive plants, including bamboo, and not just Japanese knotweed. So there's a biodiversity hierarchy for use in construction. And again, you've seen various hierarchies. We're looking at preventative and remediative. So we want to avoid causing any damage. And we want to include this. We want to do this at the early stage. So site selection, design, scheduling. We want to minimize what we're doing, make sure we've got controls in place. We want to restore. So we want to restore habitat, make sure we have good biodiversity on a site and the ecosystems working well. And in some instances, we may need to offset. So we may have to do restoration offsets, and that's set forth in the guidance as to what we might need to do. Archaeology and was mentioned. We have to remember that oftentimes we look at a site and we just see it from a geologist's point of view. So we're looking at it in terms of types of geology that is present. We need to consider that in some instances that this site has had a historical use, and there may be relics within that soil that need to be considered. And so as part of our surveys, our preliminary surveys, we need to look at whether or not this may be an important archaeological site, or we may find something. Again, if we find treasure on the site, it needs to be reported in 14 days. And I've given you a link as to where to get further information about treasure. Land contamination. So CLR 11, one of the things Joanne didn't mention before was that in 2016, we had the government's wonderful red tape challenge, where they mothballed CLR 11. And since that time, it's been realized we actually need the guidance on land contamination. And so the land contamination risk management has been published by the government, and I've given you a link to that. We need to define the contamination, look at what kind of regulatory requirements we have, make sure we've got that risk management in place, make sure we have a waste management and a waste management plan in place, and that we've got plans in place for odor, noise, dust, and light, and that we have resource management, energy, materials, and water. So Joanne has shown you the circular economy for waste. So we want to be able to use that waste and try to find another source for it. And again, we have the waste hierarchy. So going from prevention down all the way to disposal, which we want to avoid at all costs if we can. We want to be able to treat it, reuse it, but not necessarily have to send things to landfill. Water resources. Joanne talked about water resource stress. Again, as part of our preliminary work on a first site, we should be looking at whether or not we've got, we're going to have contribute to water stress. We need to consider whether or not our site is likely to flood, and we'll have water escape from the site during development or flooding post-development. The potential for water pollution, and make sure we have a mitigation strategies in place to protect our controlled waters, and make sure we understand our legal and regulatory requirements. And so I've just set forth a couple of diagrams here talking about what are the kind of common pollutants that you might find on site. This is in an information box in the guidance. And again, the water hierarchy for how we should try to protect the water environment. Traffic, we need to make sure we've got a traffic management plan, and we've got checklists in the document for what should be included. We need to consider any kind of regulatory requirements for traffic, and we have some guidance on how to develop a good traffic management plan and manage the movement of traffic, both on site and nearby and off site, so through town for our vehicles to get to our site. We have appendices, and the appendices include an example of an environmental management plan and a suggested content list. And then the second appendix gives you examples of environmental assessment schemes. So a lot of developers are members of the Considerate Constructor scheme. Some are involved in BREEAM infrastructure. There's the whole Home Quality Mark, LEED, and there are others, and they're all listed in the appendix in the document.
Cecilia, are you nearly there?
Yeah, this should have been somewhere else, but that's okay. In the beginning, we're doing planning, setting up, and managing the site. And so again, we need to make sure we've got the site organized properly so that we're not causing any kind of issues on the site. And thank you.
Oh, how about that? Your timing's perfect, Cecilia. Thank you very much.
Okay.
That's brilliant. Well, that leaves us on now to finding out, not only have we heard about why we needed to change and what's in the guide, and thank you, that was an amazing zip through, Cecilia, because you had a lot of ground to cover. We're now going to see what happens when you're on site and what the contractor's view of all of this is. Steve, thank you very much for joining us. Over to you. You have 20 minutes.
Thanks, Claire. Well, I've included quite a few of Cecilia's aspects of good practice for environmental management, so that's a good start. So I'm going to give you a contractor's perspective for. Oh God, I can't. Here we go. I've got control now. So give you a contractor's perspective for environmental good practice on site. Brief mention of who Soil Fix are. We're a specialist contractor based in with offices throughout the UK, almost 20 years old now. We've specialising design and build remediation of soil and groundwater, but we also carry out a lot of earthworks, site enabling works on brownfield sites, and also archaeological and ecological support to those projects, and also more recently some interesting environmental restoration projects. We work for a variety of sectors, and we're very actively involved with not just CIRIA, but also REMSOC, Claire, and we've been contributors to various guidance over the years. We're very multidisciplinary, which means that we need to adopt a multidisciplined approach to environmental good practice. Very often we work on water, water cells, as they say, on development sites. So that's a big factor on how we manage environmental emissions on our site. So just to talk about a few of the drivers behind environmental good practice. I mean, obviously one driver, of course, is the reference to the CIRIA Environmental Good Practice Guide. And aside from the legislative drivers, which Cecilia and Joanne talk through, in practical terms, there's obviously planning requirements. Very often there's larger schemes or where there's a higher risk of environmental emissions being generated by a project. The planning requires a construction environmental management plan. Also, remediation strategy documents require consideration of environmental management, also ecological management plans, and there may well be archaeology requirements as well. Environmental permitting, for example, when we deploy our permit for remediation activities, that requires technical competence coverage and also requires monitoring and control plans for environmental emissions. Corporate social responsibility requirements and how that transposes into ESG, and this often transposes into contract specifications, tender requirements, and so on. And then local residents and interest groups, neighbourhood forums are a key driver. And as Joanne mentioned, engaging with the the public and local local groups and local authorities to build awareness of the measures that we're looking to put in place, and is obviously very important. There's obviously obvious reputational drivers. There's obviously more widespread accessible social media groups and website news items. Obviously news can spring up on national publications websites very quickly these days, and there's obviously a strong driver behind net zero and circular economy objectives, and that's a picture of our mobile treatment license that we display on many of our sites. So a key requirement is to reduce environmental impacts, and a key term is to as low as reasonably practicable. And obviously, if you get it wrong, you could end up in the BBC or the Guardian in terms of potential issues arising. And when I was having a bit of a Google search, I was surprised to find that there's even going to be a Netflix drama about a particular brownfields regeneration site from a number of years ago. So potential environmental impacts on construction reclamation sites. There's potential for noise emissions, dust emissions, airborne fibres, for example, asbestos fibres, vibration impacts, volatile compounds or organic compounds, and they're typically very low odour threshold, so the associated odours could present a nuisance as well as a health risk. Windblown litter from sites, and obviously that can cause degradation of plastics and ultimately cause microplastics to get into the environment. And then there's pests such as vermin, flies, and all of these are caused by poor management of waste materials on site. Mud and debris on public roadways, impact to control waters, in particular sensitive adjacent water bodies and groundwater, and impacts to biodiversity, ecology, archaeology, and so on. Documents such as CMPs and deployment documentation very often requires a contractor to think about all of these emissions and then put that into place with a monitoring and controls plan. So there's an example of a noise and dust control plan with mitigation measures, trigger and action values, and then very often flow charts for decision making, for example, for management of odours or vapours on a remediation project. So there's multiple sources of environmental impacts, and this isn't just isolated to brownfield regeneration projects that we're most frequently involved in. It could be demolition projects, greenfield construction projects, restoration projects, and so on. There's obviously heavy plant activities, particularly in urban environments that can be quite intensive on constrained sites. Odorous waste materials being excavated, and as I mentioned, often have things like coal tars have got very low odour threshold. Heavy goods vehicle and dumper movements can be a significant source of dust coming off the wheels of the lorries, and many brownfield sites contain fragments of asbestos-containing materials within shallower made ground. And then oil and sediment impacted waters can accumulate within structures like this picture of a tar tank, but also general rainwater can become cross-contaminated during remediation, or even silt washout. The water could then present an environmental risk, even if it's a greenfield site. And brownfield reclamation sites, they're often in highly populated and or environmentally sensitive locations, or both. So here's two examples. The picture on the left was a site in London that we carried out in remediation just before we started. So we had residential apartments all around the site. We had retaining walls that were very vibration sensitive, and you can't see it, but the concrete roadway crossing right through the site had a Thames water relief drain running right through it, which was very vibration sensitive. It's an old Victorian sewer. The site on the right is a large regeneration project we're currently working on in Portsmouth. So this had pretty much every sensitive receptor you could possibly consider. We had a local school, local residence, a leisure centre just out of view on the left-hand side. The site was by a tidal Ramsar protected special protection area. Parts of the site were over a principal contractor. There's a public cycleway, local highways. There was the whole lot really. So given every site's different, it's very important with your monitoring strategy is to compare against some kind of baseline to set appropriate trigger and action values to set the trigger of when do you need to stop work, think about more increasing your control measures, have a rethink, or take more drastic measures. So various applications of environmental monitoring. So frequently these Frisbee dust deposition gauges are a good way of monitoring for general dust, airborne dust, or a general environmental dust. But it's not particularly real time, it's retrospective. So on certain sites we implement real-time monitoring with PM10, which is a certain size of particle, and as you can see with solar panels on this side. Volatile organic monitoring, you can use passive diffusion tubes. Sometimes we pump through those tubes on brownfield sites where there's a high risk of vapours. Very often we carry out monitoring with an instrument. And a point to note is certain organic compounds, or many organic compounds, are actually, the odour threshold is significantly lower than the actual limited detection on that instrument. So you may well be detecting almost zero volatile organics, but there could still be an odour. Obviously the nose is a very, very effective odour assessment approach, and so much so there are actually approaches for olfactometrists to carry out sniff testing on site, and then there's respirable fibre monitoring that could be carried out as well. So noise meters, you have fixed stations or portable stations, there's vibration sensors, water sampling, groundwater sampling. So as you can see, there's a significant amount of environmental monitoring that may be required on a site. Some examples of environmental controls: dampening down of haul roads is very effective to manage that source of dust, and they'll possibly use misty systems at the boundary. You can't beat a decent jet wash set on a fine mist to suppress dust, or on a larger scale to use dust fighter units. But effective dust controls are only as effective as the water supply contractors have. Sometimes we're given a 19 mil temporary builder supply, and that barely serves the welfare unit, and so dust control can become a challenge. Other examples of vapour controls: these are misting systems with a neutraliser that's applied to it on the boundary of sites, or wrapped around the actual source, or a combination of the two, or mobile foggers as they're called, deployed near to the source of the odour, or just covering odour as stockpiles. But there is a limit to what you can do there for health and safety and practical grounds, or just simply seal the stockpile with a ditching blade of a bucket. More extreme odour controls that we've implemented: this is on a gasworks site in an urban location, so we've used spray foam to suppress it, and have sealed tipper lorries for removal of contaminated material, and you can see the odour suppressant there as well. You can actually change your approach and put a vapour extraction system as part of your treatment if it's very odorous material, or the extreme is to put a tent over the excavation, but that needs to be justified on a cost versus benefit. It's a very challenging and expensive thing to do, particularly with machine emissions to control, and safety controls with that. Surface groundwater protection, to create a bunded treatment plant, either on hard stand or use a good polythene, using silk curtains and booms on the edge of waterways. These are some environmental restoration projects we've been working on. Keep excavations regularly pumped out, manage the water in the first place and stop it escaping, or manage the surface water ditches and improve the the drainage on the perimeter of a site, or simple use of silt fencing to prevent runoff. We have integrated ecological and archaeological mitigations on some brownfield development schemes. They do need to be very carefully managed, but it can be done, and particularly from a health and safety perspective, to make sure that the archaeologists aren't being exposed to contaminants within made ground, for example, and also aspects of ecological management, such as reptile control. We have relocated bats to a relocation roost to facilitate some demolition on a previous project. And of greater importance of contracted works is to actually measure and reduce our carbon emissions. So contractors are being required to produce a carbon footprint assessment, and it's also good practice to do so. And we've actually developed our own carbon calculator, so we can predict and then capture the actual greenhouse gas emissions on a project. And then there's more solar and wind powered equipment that's on the market now for things like welfare and monitoring equipment, and use of biofuels like HVO, which significantly reduces CO2 emissions, but it does cost more. So there is a cost attached to it. It's about 30p a litre at the moment, more than standard gas oil. It's very important to take the workforce with you, as well as the local residents. So good practice and communication on site, and that encourages a better and more productive work environment. We find it's lead from the front, and what we found is implementing a mobile app for both health and safety observations, but also environmental observations, where we can capture environmental incidents and non-conformances, but also good practices. Things like you can see nappies being deployed underneath plant that can leak fuel. So we captured that as a good practice. And what we found is, in the few 2 or 3 years that we've been implementing this work wallet app, we found that good practice, which is the green line, outweighs non-conformance. So people take pride in actually recognising and reporting good practice on the site. It's just a better environment, a more effective environment to work in. So as we talked about the drivers and implications, that there are numerous drivers requiring good practice. And as environmental awareness has increased over the years, I would say that tolerance to these environmental impacts has decreased, sometimes justifiably, sometimes not. Humans are very, very detectors of noise, vibration and odours in particular. Effective risk perception, therefore, is important as ever. It's communicating with the local residents, having neighbourhood forums, leaflet drops, notice boards. That's all aspects that we've got experience in implementing. But a key term is to manage risk to as low as reasonably practicable. It's impossible to completely eradicate all noise, dust, odour. It's getting it managed as much as you can. Poor planning and reactive approaches can quickly lead to problems. We prefer to be proactive and plan, manage environmental good practice. And obviously it can lead to time and cost considerations. You could have delays on site, inefficient working to stop works and put things right. You could have regulatory or even legal interventions for nuisance. And there's also obviously there's a higher risk these days of reputational impact. So leading from the front is communication is key, and a well-managed site with a better working environment is a more productive site. As I discussed, use of web-based tools is a great way of underpinning that, and it dominates your reporting. And then more effective techniques are on the market. More and more, there's different approaches to controlling dust and odours, and we're always trialing new approaches. Ecological and archaeological controls can be integrated with brownfield reclamation, even when you've got scheduled ancient monuments. Those two pictures earlier I showed you, but they do need advanced planning, and counting and reducing carbon emissions needs to become the norm. Contractors are only just starting to really use that and implement that. And climate change, in my view, has definitely become an increased factor. We are seeing either increased dry, dusty periods, believe it or not. It does seem to be a lot of rain controlling dust at the moment, but extreme rainfall events are more commonly experienced now as well, which leads to different challenges. And thank you for being considerate.
Thank you, Steve. That's brilliant. So we'll now move on to our question and answer session. So I would like to invite our speakers to rejoin us. Are you all there? Excellent. Excellent. Right. So let's see where we're starting with. So I've got a question here, which I'm just going to start with in case you need to go away and find the answer out for this, Joanne. Simon has asked us, is the 5th edition available on the CIRIA platform, Engineering Workbench Construction Information Service?
I believe not at the moment. The report is available on IHS if you subscribe to it. I'm just interested in that platform, actually. If anybody can enlighten me, is it a CIRIA?
Joanne, I've used that platform, and while you're sitting there, I'm just going to go and look on that platform right now, because I believe I have a link to it that I can get too easy.
Right. Well, we'll leave you with that at the moment. And while we move on to the next question from Lucinda Long, and she is asking, what advice is included in the guide regarding how the records, drawings and specifications and required ongoing maintenance and life expectancy of remedial components, e.g. MEMS, caps, etc., should be passed on to the site's post-completion land managers? I'm thinking particularly of improving inclusion of key information in landscape management plans to help avoid future accidental damage to components. So I don't know whether, while Cecilia's looking for this, whether putting you in the hot seat, Joanne, to answer that question. It was certainly something we discussed, Lucinda. I mean, we all recognise the importance of handing on information. I'm not sure that, because this is a site guide, that there was too much detail on that post-construction monitoring and maintenance aspects. But Joanne, perhaps you could help us on that one.
Yeah, all right, that's correct. You know, we were when we wrote the guide, we were focusing on things that you need to do on site, where a lot of things have been decided. But obviously, record keeping is an important aspect of the when you actually working on site. So at the moment, there isn't, just to be honest with you, there isn't much in the report. Cecilia, I don't remember too much.
All of this, I mean, there's been a push for BIM, for building information management systems, for quite a while. And all of this information, you would think from the very, very beginning, at the start of the project, all of this information should be captured in the BIM. It is very, very difficult. And I know, because one of the last projects I worked on with a developer, he got to the point where he was ready for us to go to planning to assist in getting his remediation planning condition released, and needed us to produce reports. And when I asked him to please provide me with the data to show me what, I needed his waste management plan, I needed, because we didn't do everything, I was just doing this part of his work, and to show me the data for where they could show me that, you know, the data for the soils that they brought in, the quality of the soils they brought in. They couldn't find it. It was all over the place. It wasn't in a building information management system. You know, he wanted me to get his planning application. He wanted his planning approval, his planning condition lifted in 48 hours. And it was going to take him 2 weeks to find the data because they weren't storing it all in the same place. But if it was in a BIM, then from the very beginning, if they set up a building information management system, then all of the data from the original site investigation and that was undertaken, and all of the information that's collected while the contractors are on site should all be being stored in that building information management system. But right now, there's no legislative requirement, I want to say, that forces a developer to use a building information management system. It's just a recommendation. Does that answer the question?
I think it answers the question in terms of what's in the guide. I'm not sure it helps Lucinda make her way through the challenges of obviously getting the right information handed over for operation and maintenance going forward.
Yeah, it is. I think it is difficult. And with respect to the other question, yes, C811 is on the portal.
Oh, is it?
Yep.
Oh, okay.
I'm looking at it right now.
So
that's something I'm aware of that.
So coming back, yes. So Lucinda's kindly said that she is a landscape officer currently working in assessing planning applications and often sees a separation between construction and aftercare. What I would say, Lucinda, is we see exactly the same issue in handover documentation for some of the things we verify on a land contamination front. And I do think it would be helpful if more of that is captured at the time of, I certainly in my remediation strategies talk about what happens to that verification data, and that should what should be in the handover document for that maintenance and operation. And that quite often is part of the planning condition wording as well about maintenance, and perhaps that's somewhere those could be caught. Thank you very much. Right, so just going back then to Simon Murray's question, then you've answered it, Cecilia. You have found it on the.
All he has to do is log in and type C811 and it comes right up.
Brilliant.
So he can do a search on C811 in the portal and it will be there. Okay.
I'm going to ask Joanne this question. As well as the main guide, is there an accompanying pocket guide and or pre-prepared toolbox talks as for some previous editions? These were very useful. This is from Nick Cooper.
Yeah, interestingly, we did discuss about updating the pocket guide, which came with the 4th edition around 2016. I can't remember when, I think. At that moment in time, the project steering committee didn't seem to be very keen on it, and I've talked to the authors of that pocket guide, who is now working for a house builder, and he said the same thing, saying that they don't think they need to update the pocket guide. So yes, if this is what you guys feel we should do, we can progress on it. And also, perhaps it's a question back to Nick. The pocket guide is a pocket guide. It is a report. I just wonder if with nowadays everybody got a smartphone, that maybe an app would be easier to use. Especially like people like Steve as well, who's sort of working on site a lot of time. I know you already got some apps for soil fix in another different issue, different technical areas. Do you think an app would be useful?
Yeah, having some kind of app that you can access information and extract toolbox talks would be useful. But sites very often like to, obviously print them out and laminate them, display them for people's awareness or refer to.
Well, that's what we used to do.
Yeah, the app's really good to capture observations, and of good practice, non-conformance, safety observations, and so on, improvements, and collating that information.
Okay, it's interesting. Yeah, because obviously producing an app, the cost of producing an app is quite different to producing a laminated short guide, the pocket guide. So that's a financial implication on producing it as well.
So we've subscribed with a company who's bespoke their work, the work wallet system for SoilFix site. So.
Okay. And what would be good is I know, this sounds to be me asking the audience a question. If you feel that you want us to update the pocket guide, could you put a note on the QA box so that we know? Say yes is a good idea or no is not a good idea. As simple as that, so that I can do some sort of market research in that respect. Is that okay, Claire?
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. So that would be really helpful, I think, because as I say, that it has been something that's had mixed views, but at the end of the day, Joanne is not standing out on site herself, and therefore, if you are able to say whether you think that would be helpful, that would be good to use. The toolbox talks, are they still available, Joanne?
Yes, they're still available. They're actually quite old, well before my time. You can see how old it was. They have different aspects from health and safety. As again, it'd be great if you feel that you will be good if we should update it. Or I understand that a lot of companies have their own toolbox talks developed for the staff already, and maybe the days that when we first developed CIRIA one, company were not doing it so often. So our toolbox talk became quite often, quite important, quite useful, but.
Again, if you could let us know if you are, you think, a refresh of the toolbox talks and adding to them with new things, that would be grand. Right, I need to move swiftly on because we are going to run out of time on these questions, and I've got quite a few here. So I'm going to ask the next question, which I hope I'm pronouncing the name right. I think it's from Zeke, who's asking, does the guidance cover soil health and maintaining soil quality during construction phase? Cecilia, are you able to answer that one for us off the top of your head?
We discuss managing soil and having a soil management plan, but we don't go into detail with respect to soil health. At the time that we were working on the guidance, there is a separate group that CIRIA has organized, that Joanne has, that are looking at overall soil health. And I think, I may be wrong, but I think there'll be some separate guidance on soil health coming out from CIRIA, Joanne, am I right?
Yeah, we published a soil guidance more on compliances last July. But also, CIRIA also runs what we call a soil community practice, which is to promote good soil management as a whole, but also consider things like soil health. So if you're interested in participating or getting involved in the soil community practice, please let me know. The major output of the community practice is a web portal, which is actually live now. So I can send you a link. So there is obviously guidance, the knowledge-based guidance. On the knowledge-based section, but we'll also deliver stakeholders webinars. It's a bit like today's format, but 3-4 times a year as well. So if you want to be involved, please let me know.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Right. I'm not quite sure I'm understanding this question correctly. I'm going to read it out. I think, so what we've got here, as this serves as a guide to demonstrate good practices on site, would it be proper to reference this guide along the line of a project? I think what we're asking here is whether it would be right to, it would be a good idea to reference this guide when working on projects. Is that right, whoever's asked this question? Because I'm afraid it's not got a name against it. If you could confirm that's right.
I think it's the same thing that you think, Claire.
And I would say that very much, when we're talking about this is setting the bar of what good practice is like. If you are following good practice, then that is very good defense if you're ever put in the position of having to defend yourself from any claims or court cases or whatever. So from that point of view, I think it does have real value. Would anyone else like to say anything else? Otherwise, we'll move on. Okay, moving on. I have actually got one for Steve, and he's been sitting there very quietly. And although it hasn't quite made it into the Q&A box, this is from Thea, I think. Hi, Steve. How do you ensure adequate ventilation when using a tent for odour control? And how does the cost of a tent compare to using a mobile fogger? There you go. One for you.
Question. So obviously, putting a tent over an excavation to control odours, for example, or dust, creates another significant problem, which is plant working within that confined space very quickly would accumulate exhaust fumes, which obviously is a risk to health. So you have to have very large blowers that extract the air, and effectively you're moving the air. I think the rule of thumb is 5 times the volume of the tent has to be moved in any given hour to then to make sure you're below the levels for carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, and so on. And then that they're passed through large air activated carbon vessels to filter the air. The cost of a tent system compared to using on-site misters and foggers, it can significantly increase the cost of remediation. Even a relatively small excavation like over a tar tank, or for example as a source of significant odour, that can add hundreds of thousands onto the price of remediation. And it could even double it depending on the size of it. The bigger the tent, the harder it is, the bigger the excavation. So
okay, Steve, thank you.
I mean, timing of year is important. That's an important factor. So where we've remediated a tar tank, for example, in the winter, if we'd have done it in the summer, we'd have had to have a tent. So it depends on the timing of year as well, planning that.
Right, thank you, Steve. That's partly, in fact, an answer to somebody else's question further on about are there any seasonal good practices considered? But I'm going to leave you there with that one, and I'm going to actually ask about waste next. Thank you. So the question is from Zeke again. Misclassification of waste tends to be an issue in the waste industry. A better understanding of the waste producer's responsibility around this would massively help improve this. Is this covered in the guidance? So, Cecilia.
Yes, we spend quite a bit of time talking about waste management plans and making sure that you have undertaken the appropriate testing, appropriate sorting, and that you dispose of the waste properly and you are using a properly licensed waste carrier. So we do go into quite a bit of information about waste.
And on top of that, if you really want to get into nitty-gritty, Joanne has also published a book on the sustainable management of soils, which looks at a lot of these compliance issues and even does looking more, I think it has an illustrated example about how to classify waste on site. So if you want to get into that sort of level of detail, I would really recommend CIRIA's other guide on that. Joanne, perhaps you could put the reference of that in the chat box for us.
Yep, it's C7809. Hang on, let me just go.
So
Find the chat box.
I think this is our last question, which will wrap us up quite nicely before I need to move on to finishing this webinar off. So I've got here, I don't know who it is, but they have asked us, I'm interested in water management on site. Is there anything on the use of ponds, whether to line or not, and managing the water so that it is fit to reuse for dust suppression or discharge to the environment? Are seasonal good practices considered? And I think that's a really good question. Cecilia.
We talk about water and the need for a water management plan. We don't go into detail with regards to the creation of ponds, lined or not. Obviously, if you're going to store water for future use, you want to make sure it's stored appropriately. If the land is contaminated, you don't want it in contact with contamination. So you would be lining it wherever you were storing it or barreling it up. Seasonal good practice is considered in a number of locations throughout the guidance, because we have to take into account the seasons, whether we've got a lot of water, whether we're going into a drought, are we going to have enough water? With respect to the ecology, we certainly don't want to be doing works when we have nesting birds or we've got migratory species on our site. I once worked on a site where we couldn't do anything for months because there was a nesting falcon in a gas tower. So so we had to wait for them to move on. And then we went into a windy season and we couldn't work then either because it was too windy for anyone to do any work around that gas tower. So yes, we take into account the needs, again, with respect to controls of odors, dusts, and the like, nuisances. We have to take into account seasonality, all of it. So seasonality is considered throughout, and in with respect to water in particular, because of the fact that we don't know whether we'll be in a very wet, whether the season is going to be very wet or very, very dry, and we need to take that into consideration in our water management plans. I hope that answers the question.
I mean, it's a good suggestion. We have harvested rainwater and use that for dust suppression on certain projects. The one thing about dust management is particularly the dust fighter unit that I showed you. That, I mean, we've had to issue some guys with on site with sou'westers and wellies because it over suppresses really. So and we had the client who's a mega tractor saying, "No, keep using it." We say, well, we don't need to because we've managed the dust, and it actually saturated the ground so much it caused geotechnical issues. So you do need to be careful that solving one problem, the dust, can actually cause another problem, the ground conditions.
Yeah,
so,
unintended consequences.
Yeah.
None of us want those, do we, Steve?
Yeah, so don't overdo it.
Thank you. That's great. Well, thank you to all our speakers for both giving us such interesting presentations. I mean, I had not really appreciated just how much the numbers had increased in construction. I mean, that's a lot of people. We've heard how the productivity has decreased as a result of the climate change that we're seeing. We can see that climate change is not only something that we're talking about from a theoretical point of view, but Steve on site is actually seeing those changes happening as well. You've seen from the very quick glimpse that Cecilia has given you of just the range of environmental issues that have been covered in this new guidance. And I think you can see from the question and answer that, you know, that has considered quite a lot of issues that people here are already beginning to think about. And I can only see that this is going to continue the environment to play a bigger and bigger role in what we're doing on site. We need to see this becoming a culture, just like we've developed a health and safety culture on site. And I think, again, Steve was bringing to bear there the fact that actually communication and leadership is vital to embedding that sort of culture to deliver good practice. And what we hope is being done with this guidance is to give you the knowledge and the tools with the checklists, etc., to help you on your way to embedding that culture in the work that you are doing. I want to thank everybody who's joined us today, because actually I often find that the discussions we have after the presentations are often as valuable as listening to the speakers. And oh, I'm being moved on now. So thank you all for that. We will circulate the link to the speakers' presentations if we have their consent to do so. We don't have any questions, I think, that we haven't responded to, but if you do have anything else and you want to get in touch, please do. There is a feedback poll, and here it is for you to complete. We are obviously keen to hear what you've got to think about this one, and actually anything else you'd like to hear us talk on, or perhaps guidance that you'd like CIRIA to develop. As you can see here, as a delegate, you do have the opportunity for a fantastic value deal on the guide. So please, if you want to do that, you can see that you've got a code to do. So offer ends on the 2nd of May. I mean, the book you can sell by its fact it's on its 5th edition has been invaluable to industry over the years, and I have no doubt this one will fulfill the same sort of role. Just a couple of other things. The SUDS Awards, here are the key dates for you. In fact, it's 19th of April has already gone. So you will have had to have got your awards in already, but we are obviously looking forward to the award ceremony in June on the 26th. And this is, of course, what we were mentioning, where the award submission deadline is still open. So if you've got any great projects showing biodiversity in your projects, then please do put them in for the Big Biodiversity Challenge 2024. It would be great to see those. And I think we've reached the end. Is that right? Let me just, there is nothing else, is there? Nope, that is it. So thank you all very much for joining us. It's been fantastic that you've been able to be here. Do enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Thank you.